This is episode 5 in our webinar series on BIM management. I'm Damien and I'm here with Ezzy.
Hi everybody, welcome back.
Welcome back. We're going to start by asking, why did your BIM fail? And that's a pretty tough question, but it's going to lead us on to the next step, which is figuring out what motivates people. And then we'll go over some simple steps to do BIM right. And finally, we'll figure out if your BIM is fully baked and what that even means. So stay tuned and let's get started. So let's start with why did your BIM fail? So there's many reasons why your BIM might fail, and maybe it was just a crash right from the start, like these poor guys here. It's actually probably a lot more common than I think we'd like to admit. Just want to get started and get working, but there's a lot of challenges and hurdles to overcome. Everyone's got different capabilities and ideas.
Let's talk about why some projects start like this and what can cause those failures to take place. Sometimes we don't have the right team involved, and often it's because different expectations aren't aligned properly. It can come down to bad communication between the different parties, poor delivery, no quality checks in place, if we didn't verify the deliverables, or if they weren't even used. And so there can be a lot of different reasons why, and also this can waste a lot of time and effort if we don't get things right. So firstly, why is it difficult to align expectations?
Well, one of the major issues is bad communication, and we see this a lot. So there's a couple examples here of really poorly defined scope. And the first one is just one line in a contract where the owner is requesting something, and they're basically saying, "Can I have some BIM, please?" In the form of a loosely worded statement without any clarification. But the one that we see here, which defines milestones, and if you're using LOD numbers, a progression from one milestone to another that just goes from 2 to 3 to 4, it just doesn't always work like that on a project. And that's something that happens more often than you might think. And it really does lead to bad communication. It can have a negative impact on the project right from the very start.
So there are many variables to consider. There's a lot of standards out there, all trying to define the elements or the geometry or the accuracy, the reliability, and so on. But as you can see here in this chart, we have to decide how much information and how much scope to include. So you add up all the variables, and now you're supposed to fit that all into 5 categories. And that's going to be tough. You might need to ask, what's the measured accuracy? What's the represented accuracy? What standards are you going to follow? What's the purpose, and why are you doing BIM in the first place? So if we did manage to get all that defined, what happens now? Do we just start doing BIM? Is that it? Do we just go? Well, that would be great. But in reality, without planning, without arranging the sequence of events, and without understanding when those deliverables are going to occur, we end up with bottlenecks, and we get a lot of deliverables that need to be reviewed all at the same time. There are a lot of efficient processes out there that we can use, but if we don't have them aligned internally or have the right tools to support them, we could be wasting a lot of time making sure that they meet the initial requirements that were agreed upon.
So then we need to look at the team, and there's 2 sides to this equation. It's not just the people creating the models, it's also the people requesting the models. Are we competent enough to request the deliverable, and are we competent enough to provide the deliverable? So there's 2 parts to that equation. And competency is quite interesting because BIM hasn't been around forever. So there's new people learning BIM, and they should be requesting, but maybe they need some support in the first few projects. Even if they have a great attitude and pick things up quickly, they still need to gain knowledge over time. And it's important for them to understand where they fit inside a company, what their role is, and what they're responsible for. Knowing this will avoid people overstretching, taking on too much, and making mistakes that will cost time and effort later on. There's some really good competency frameworks available. The BIM framework website has some great foundations to build on your own. And some examples, such as the competency questionnaire, which people can send out. This is an example where it asks a company mission statement, and whether that mission statement incorporates BIM and whether it incorporates Lean. So some of these principles incorporated into a company mission statement can really help you understand what that company is trying to achieve.
Great. So let's take a look at what motivates teams. Each team is different, and they might have a different perspective, a different set of reasons, and different goals for doing BIM.
Right. They might be an architect, an engineer, a contractor, owner, or service provider, and each of those will have different motivations.
Family owner, I might have read about BIM online, and I might just ask for some BIM. I might want to use it in my design reviews to communicate with the public about what's going on. I might want to sell a property and market that to an external buyer, maybe using virtual reality if someone is in another country, for example. I might be trying to save costs in construction. Maybe I'm trying to optimize my facilities and operations and provide that data to my facilities team. So there are some reasons, these are some reasons why an owner might be motivated to use BIM.
And then there's architects. They want to win more business, keep up with competition, or maybe it's just because the client asked them to use it. And then there's the efficient workflows, which they can use and benefit from. So phase planning, design reviews, using VR between them and the client. Also coordination, work efficiencies among the construction document processes, for example. So these are a few examples of why an architect might want to use BIM.
And contractors, they also might want to win more business. Someone else could have asked for it. It could be for coordination to reduce the risk in the construction process, to verify quantities and estimates. Also, it could be for simulations to understand safety or phase planning. These are some reasons why a contractor might be motivated for using BIM.
And then for engineers, again, the obvious one is to win more work just because someone asked for it. But also it can help them with design coordination, system analysis, their bill of materials. And if they have a fabrication team on site, they might be modeling their design and producing that same model for the fabrication facilities. And finally, track and change orders. So if they already have a bill of quantities and the model changes, you can do a difference in quantities, which will help them inform those change orders.
And then service providers. So you have a lot of BIM service providers that are supporting our industry, creating models for projects where there's maybe a gap in the scope. Maybe there's a need for acceleration of the team's capabilities. And really the hope is that they're here to improve our industry more rapidly. So as you can see, there is a variety of motivations for using BIM.
So in summary, many people are using it because they've been asked to do so, or just because they want to win business because it's a requirement on the project they're pitching for. But these aren't really, the most ideal reasons for using BIM. What we want to see is people using BIM because they understand and acknowledge that BIM can really help them work better, essentially to gain efficiencies in their workflow. So for the architect, being able to cut 2D drawings much faster, and for the contractor, getting quantities for estimating. There's so many good reasons everyone should be using BIM in their workflow. It's important to use BIM for the right reasons and motivations.
Definitely.
Right, so we have talked about why projects fail sometimes. We've talked about what motivates teams, and really the key to getting the BIM that you've paid for is a combination of understanding what's failed in the past, understanding what is really going to motivate those teams, and deliver what's important for you. So let's talk about the simple steps to get the right BIM.
Firstly, let's define the why. Why are we doing BIM in the first place? What is the purpose? This will help us to set those major milestones within the project that we can then define with scope. Each information delivery milestone needs a certain amount of scope, which is really just defining the what, the list of items that we need to use. And then there's how much is required, whether that is LOD or the right level of geometry, the information required. Define what we need at each milestone. The most efficient and successful workflows that we've seen are those that only progress when needed. So if we need something in 2D, we'll get it in 2D. But if that changes and we now need it in 3D, then get it in 3D then. So really focus on when you might need these objects and when they need to progress in detail.
Right, so what's the geometry documentation? What's the information? Define how much of these is required for each information delivery milestone, and also understand who is responsible for it, especially when you have a handover. So where we've got stairs that were required only in 2D for a structural estimate, and then later on at a different milestone, the structural engineer was involved for an MEP coordination that was required in 3D. So that's when the 3D modeling for the stairs needs to take place. We've seen an amazing 53% reduction in issues based on being able to sequence the tasks for each one of those milestones in an order that makes sense for the teams so that there's less rework. It's an amazing ability to have a delivery sequence that makes sense. And that way, you can put things in place once rather than having to do the same task over and over once you've made a decision.
So we've looked at why do projects fail, what motivates teams, and then some simple steps on how you can get the right BIM. And you could refer to those steps as a recipe. So then the question would be, well, how do you know if your BIM is fully baked?
So how do you know if it's ready to go? Well, here we go. We've got some banana bread. It's really trendy at the moment. That's one of my favorites as well. But there's a massive difference between the half-baked bread on the left and the fully baked bread. I'm not sure about you, Ezzy, but I'm not a huge fan of the stodgy half-baked stuff.
It's a bit like the great BIM bake-off, I guess you'd call it. Yeah. It definitely needs to be fully baked, I would say. How do you know when your BIM is ready, though? That's the question, isn't it? How do we know when it's ready? You put all this work and effort into place, and when it comes to making the bread, like in our analogy, you follow the recipe. You make sure the oven is set to the right temperature and so forth. But for BIM, how do we know when it's ready? Well, we assume that it's ready, or maybe we're told that it's ready. And this is one of the main problems that we see. We just have a start date and a due date, and then everyone shows up on the due date and says, "Here you go. They hand over their information all at once, and now you have this massive bottleneck trying to work through all the information you've been given. This can cause so many issues. There might be clashes, things are missing, items are in the wrong place. This leads to a lot of finger pointing and angry emails from people who didn't get the information they were hoping for. So if you can come up with a smaller, a bite-sized process to deliver in sections, rather than having everything dumped on you all at once, you're going to be a lot more efficient that way.
Yeah, so we've seen that using Kanban boards to understand tasks and having each person who's responsible for those tasks simply drag and drop to show what's ready for review. It doesn't have to be the full model. It could be just a few elements. Just being able to say that this is ready for your review, that really helps break up the bottleneck and alleviates a lot of the pressure to get everything done at the same time.
Definitely. So once something is in a bite-sized form, how do we check that it's ready?
Well, it'd be great if you could have the BIM execution plan, the BIM requirements, the BIM scope, and the BIM deliverables for that milestone all in the same place as the BIM model. BEP and the model in the same place, that's really cool, right? That makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. And then also being able to sort the elements for QA. For example, the light fixtures or the wall sockets. These are all distributed throughout the building, but imagine if you can review them all in one place, bunch them all into one group and check everything is correct. Imagine being able to explode the building, sort it out into these groups, then you can go through the QA process in a much more streamlined way. So we've talked about when to check, now what to check.
So if you have a set of requirements, maybe there's warranty details, like on this example, and material is required, and going through that to check that the geometry and information requirements are present is a really important step. So rather than producing that model and then delivering it before you've checked it, make sure everything gets checked off as you go. And that's a really, really powerful way of working.
Definitely. So now, how do you track the progress and make sure you're in compliance?
So usually it's just a checklist that you go through and you just check everything off one by one as you go. But imagine if you could connect that to your BIM tasks and visually see the model and filter and hide what's been verified and what's been updated, and then tick it off. I mean, that would be a huge improvement, right?
Yeah, I agree. Also, how about making sure that when you have a model and that checklist is finished, that is the only time that you share and publish the model once it's been done. It's a great way for everyone to know what the status is on the milestone once it's been published. Everyone can get involved at that time, not before. And now they can open it and review it, and now they know what to do with it. So finally, we're talking about BIM compliance. And it's really important, but a difficult part of the process when you've got a model or lots of models all at the same time, and you haven't really got a way of checking them against the original requirements. So we need to consolidate those requirements and making sure that you're reviewing them against the checklist before you share and publish them.
Cool. In conclusion, we talked a lot about the motivations of people, but how to get the BIM that you paid for is a series of steps, and it starts from understanding why people are going to do BIM in the first place.
Yeah, and also understanding what you wanted to pay for and what it is that you really wanted out of that model, and making sure that if you understood that, did everybody else understand it as well? We can't stress enough how important it is to make sure everyone involved understands and knows what those requirements are.
Yeah, and also being able to sequence, track, and manage them. Make sure that when you're reviewing them, that is connected with the requirements and deliverables. You can see how much of the model has been approved. Not having to approve the whole thing before you can share it, but being able to share and publish as you go.
Well, great. That's the end of today's session. Hope you all enjoyed it.
I did.
So like previous weeks, if you were here before, here are our email addresses. We are offering a free BIM diagnostic check for anybody who would like one. Usually it's £200, but for you lovely people who've been involved here today, get in touch with us via the emails or the website, and we will get you on the check.
Yeah,
And,
that's free to attendees today.